Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. In today's video I'm going to be talking about modal auxiliary verbs, and in this video I'm not going to be going over the definition of each modal auxiliary verb individually. Rather, I'm going to be showing you 3 easy rules that you can remember to use modal auxiliary verbs correctly, or another way to look at it, 3 mistakes to avoid when you are using modal auxiliary verbs. Okay, so what is a modal auxiliary verb? Well, I have the basic ones here: can, will, should, would, must, might, may, could, and shall as well. And a regular auxiliary verb is typically associated with a specific tense. So for example, in the simple past we use the auxiliary did. We use have or has in the present perfect. We use the verb to be, is, are, was, were in the continuous tenses, and so on. But a modal auxiliary verb is not like that. It's not associated with a specific tense. Rather, it shows modality. So it has a specific function. For example, it can express ability, like in the case of can. It can express obligation, like in the case of must. Some of them can express possibility or probability, like with must, can, might, could, and may. Or you can use something like should to express advice or to give advice. Okay, well, that's the definition of a modal auxiliary verb, but the first rule that you need to remember is that they have only one form. So again, if we compare them to a regular verb, you have the verb do, which you can change to does. You can add es in the simple present if the subject is he, she, or it. Or you can change it to the simple past. It transforms into did. This is not possible with modal auxiliary verbs. They have only one form. So it's not possible to add s or ing or ed or anything, and it is the same form regardless of the subject. So I can, you can, he can, they can, I will, you will, she will, etc. Only one form, and not only do they have only one form, they can also combine with a verb in just one form. They can only combine with a verb in the base form. So for example, occasionally a student will say something like, she can plays the piano very well. And it is correct to add the letter S in the simple present, but it is not correct when you have a modal auxiliary verb. So a verb in the base form would be play. She can play the piano very well, and it doesn't matter what the subject is. She can play, he can play, they can play, sorry, my cat can play, whatever. And it doesn't matter what modal auxiliary verb you are using, it's going to be the same rule. Can play, will play, should play, could play, or with another verb like the verb to be, can be, will be, should be, might be, must be, would be, could be. Again, it's always a modal and a verb in the base form, always. Occasionally, students will add to. So for example, she can to play, or you must to go. And again, this is not correct. Don't put to before the verb, and don't put anything else after the verb like ing, s, or occasionally ed. There is a way to use the majority of modal auxiliary verbs in the past, and I have a couple of videos showing you how to do it. Maybe check them out, but basically it's not by changing the modal, and it's not by changing the form of the verb. The form of the verb after a modal will always be a verb in the base form, regardless of the modal. Okay, so number 2, the negative form. Basically, occasionally I will see again a student say something like, I don't will go to the party, or I don't can go to the party. Well, remember that the basic rule in English to make a sentence negative is that we typically use the word not. after an auxiliary verb? Well, these are auxiliary verbs, so it's not necessary to bring in another auxiliary like don't, and it would be incorrect. We simply use the word not after the modal. So it's the modal and the word not. Cannot, will not, should not, would not, must not, might not, may not, or could not. So in this particular case, I don't will is incorrect. We would say I will not go to the party, or I cannot go to the party. Or with other modals, should not, would not, could not, might not, must not, and so on. And do remember that in conversational English, we often use contractions, and the negative form of the majority of these modal auxiliary verbs do have a contraction: can't, won't, shouldn't, wouldn't, couldn't, etc. So I will not go to the party, or I won't go to the party. And finally, in questions, basically this mistake is very, very similar to number 2. Occasionally someone will say something like, do you can help me? Or do you will go to the party? Or something like that. And again, the basic rule in English to make a question or to ask a question is that we reverse the order of the subject and the auxiliary verb. But again, I already have an auxiliary verb. Modal auxiliary verbs are auxiliary verbs, so it's not necessary to bring in something like do to form the question. We simply reverse the order of the modal auxiliary with whatever subject you are using. So for example, in an affirmative sentence, we would say something like you can. In a question, simply change that order. Can you help me? Will you help me? Will you go to the party? Should I go to the party? And that's how you form the question. And basically, those are the 3 basic rules that you need to remember. And it might seem a little bit complicated at first, but there are only 3 rules, and they apply for all modal auxiliary verbs, and they are never really broken. So in a way, it is pretty easy to remember how to use them correctly.